Okay, the second part of this lesson, we're just going to talk about negative angles. Okay, so to finish off with the reciprocal functions, if you remember the cast rule remains the same for the reciprocal functions. So um, in the first quadrant, all of the reciprocal functions are positive. In the second one, sine is positive. We know that from the cast rule, which means that cosecant is also positive because sine and cosecant match up. They're reciprocals of each other. In the third quadrant, both tan and cotan are positive, and in the third quadrant, cosine and secant are both positive. So nothing's changing, okay, because we're still using the same x and y and r values. All we're doing is switching if they're in the numerator or the denominator. Okay, negative angles are just the opposite of regular angles. So normally we have positive angles, and positive angles travel counterclockwise, right? So from the x-axis counterclockwise, this would be 60, or over here would be 100 and something. Okay, you can go over to the third quadrant and around to the fourth quadrant. If the angle is negative, that means it's going in a clockwise direction. So instead of going from the x-axis counterclockwise, we're going from the x-axis clockwise. Okay, so one of the days your calculators were giving you negative angles. That's just trying to help you out with where the angles are in the pictures. So negative angles are angles that are going clockwise from the x-axis. Okay, a coterminal angle is an angle that shares a terminal arm. Okay, and that's found by adding or subtracting 360. So if you have the same angle, but one is counterclockwise and one is clockwise, they're coterminal. So if you look at these two pictures here, the terminal arm hasn't moved. Okay, so the terminal arm for 60 degrees and for negative 300 degrees is in the exact same position, right? Because this here is going to be your 60 degrees. So negative 300 and 60 are coterminal angles because they share the same terminal arm. Okay, so what we can do with negative angles is we can solve for our ratios, and we're going to use our special triangles again to get the exact value of the ratio. So if we're trying to find sine negative 30, okay, what that means on our terminal arm diagram, negative 30 would be this angle here, going backwards, okay, going clockwise. So what we want to figure out is what is my actual ratio for this. So the answer is whatever sine 30 is, so we can use our special triangles, and we know that sine 30 equals 1 over 2. And then because it's negative 30, we know that we're in the fourth quadrant. So using our cast rule, we know that sine is going to be negative in the fourth quadrant, right? Because only cosine is positive. So that tells us that our ratio is negative. Okay, so you use the angle to draw your terminal arm diagram, so you know what quadrant it is in, and then you use that quadrant to figure out the answer. For example B, we have secant of negative 225. Okay, so first thing we want to do is we want to draw our terminal arm diagram. So where would negative 225 be? Okay. So negative 225 means we're coming from the x-axis clockwise around. Okay, so around 180, and then our extra bit here is 225. Okay, so this angle here is 225. Okay, if you're not sure which quadrant to draw it in, you could do 360 minus 225, and that tells us that the regular angle is 135, the coterminal angle. Right, so if you weren't sure where 225 went, you could figure out 135, and that is this angle here. That's 135. Okay, so we know that negative 225 is in the second quadrant. All right, and we have to find our related angle so that we can write the exact ratio. So we know that the negative angle is 225. we know that the normal angle is 135, but what we need to find is our related angle. So our angle less than 90 degrees, right in here. So we can do that by subtracting from 180. Okay, and that tells us that our related angle is 45 degrees. Okay, so the secant of negative 225 is going to give us the same ratio as the secant of 45. Okay, so before we do any work, we have to remember that secant is the reciprocal of cos, so it's the same as 1 over cos theta. Okay, so what we're actually finding is the ratio for cos 45. Okay, so once we know the ratio for cos 45 using special triangles, we can write the reciprocal of it using secant, and we can figure out if it's positive or negative using the cast rule. Okay, so cos 45 using using special triangles is going to be 1 over root 2. Okay, so cos 45 equals 1 over root 2. Which means secant of 45, or secant of negative 225, equals the reciprocal of that, which is root 2 over 1. Okay, so I've just taken my regular function cos 45 and written the reciprocal, and then you have to figure out if your ratio is going to be positive or negative. So because our terminal arm is in the the second quadrant, where sine is the only ratio that's positive, we know that this has to be negative. Okay, so our final answer is secant of negative 225 equals negative root 2 over 1.